This is the When Work Isn't Work podcast. This podcast exists to help people reignite the love of what they do in a post-pandemic world. The pandemic gave us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reflect on what is truly important to us in work and in life. I'm your host, Sinead Connolly, co-founder and director of Lotus People, an award-winning Sydney-based recruitment agency. We hope you enjoy today's chat. Amazing. So today I am joined by the wonderful Lyndal Hamwood, who is founder of ID8 Studio, a diversity, equity and inclusion consultancy. With years of experience working in this field, Lyndal is passionate about supporting organizations as they embrace diversity and different perspectives in order to drive inclusion and increase business growth. Lyndal has worked with some extremely well-known and impressive brands on their diversity programs and sees a strong DEI strategy as a crucial brand differentiator. Lyndal and I met originally very many years ago, and I was so excited that she has taken the leap into business ownership and turned her passion into her own consultancy. I am very much looking forward to this chat. Lyndal, welcome to the When Work Isn't Work podcast.
Thank you so much. Oh gosh, what a lovely intro. You have done your research. You've pulled lots of bits and bobs from all sorts of areas. I'm not surprised. That's very kind.
I'm so excited, honestly. I feel like it's such an area that deserves so much attention, and it is an area that I think we are making some sort of movements towards and progressing with in general as a country and as businesses, but there's still so much work to be done. And I just think someone with your level of passion, no matter what field it's in, that level of passion is absolutely contagious, but particularly this field. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and hearing more about sort of how you got into it as well. So I guess to kick us off, we obviously will talk about present day and your current role in your business, but I suppose if you could kick us off with maybe giving me an idea of how you got into this area of work and what sort of happened in your career path or trajectory that sort of led you to start even thinking about this as an area of interest.
Yeah. So I got into the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for anyone that's listening that doesn't understand what that means, diversity, equity, and inclusion is the coordinated effort by organizations to create organizations that are diverse in terms of demographic, inclusive in terms of their culture, and equitable in terms of the processes that they establish. Because if you aren't incorporating DEI into your business practices, chances are you're actually excluding people unintentionally. So I got into this field, gosh, it would have been about 6 or 7 years ago. It was quite a serendipitous moment, actually, and I'm really, really grateful that it happened, because it was spurred by a redundancy from my absolute dream job. I was completely shattered, and I'm grateful, though, that redundancy happened, because what it meant is that I paused to consider the path that I was on from a career perspective. I realized that leadership was something that I was really, really passionate about. So I moved from the fashion industry into leadership. And then that leadership company, which is the company that we met through, the Dream Collective, or they're now called PDC Global, they moved probably about a year after I joined into a DEI consultancy, because they could see that that's where the market was going and that's where the demand was going. So through it was kind of like building a plane as you're flying it, because DEI, it's not a new field. It's been around for decades. But in Australia, it was really new, and there weren't that many DEI consultancies, I think back in 2016 when it made the pivot. And so it gave us a really fascinating insight and front row seat into current business processes, how flawed our current status quo is, and quite often how simple the shift can be from non-inclusive to inclusive. And having worked with, it'd be over 100 businesses in that time, and thousands of leaders, it was incredible. And I still get so enthused and motivated by the penny drop moment when you talk about why inequity exists, and how we can actually individually overcome some of these attitudes and beliefs that are actually holding people back unintentionally. So that observation and that passion really grew and deepened over time, and it kind of created within me this incredible impatience and kind of anger towards the injustice that is just, it's everywhere. I myself am someone that comes from an incredible, I'm privileged in so many ways. Physical ability, education, socioeconomic. I say this because I think it's also, I want to use that for good. I want to use that, and what I speak about a lot through Ideate is generosity, extending opportunity and generosity if you are in a place to do it, to be able to extend. Not everyone needs to extend, because quite often, you know, people from marginalized demographics shouldn't and don't have the means to extend that same opportunity. But yeah, kind of over the years, it kind of, you know, deepened and grew. And then through COVID, the idea planted in my mind to, I guess, break down the boundaries between organizations that are building non-inclusive and, you know, frankly, short-sighted products and services and business strategies, breaking down the barrier between them and the underserved demographics that they have overlooked or assumed on behalf of, or just haven't considered at all. And then I guess that, you know, I kind of thought about that for a couple of years, and, you know, did, you know, programs to build up my knowledge about how to run a small business and what that, you know, how to build up a sustainable operation and, you know, sales and marketing processes. And then finally made the jump last year. So 7 months now since I've launched the business, but it's been going really, really well. You know, like we were speaking about just before we jumped on here, it is incredibly, it's almost overwhelming if I bucket all of the conversations that I've had since launching the business and share the message of, you know, to the, you know, to people that are just outright rejectful or, you know, just apathetic about the whole DEI movement, because I totally appreciate it's been really politicized. It's quite divisive, and I understand where people are coming from. I really do. And it's because DEI isn't always handled the right way. But I'm so motivated by the fact that when I speak to these people that are, you know, just on one end of the spectrum, they're not interested and they think it's just a bunch of garbage. You know, when I say to them, well, you know, if you're not actually thinking about the full addressable market that could benefit and enjoy your products and services, and I can guarantee that you haven't, because when we don't have the ability to reflect on our biases and how that impacts our decisions and how that impacts our mental models and the way we see the world, then you have built a non-inclusive and non-sustainable and very short-sighted business. And then I also talk about that, you know, we don't need to go too much into detail about this, but one of the key messages that makes people go, is, you know, looking at the types of work that has, I guess, you know, the different types of works. We can look at it in like a quadrant. But in the, you know, like a century ago, common types of work were, say, very manual and very routine. In the 80s and 90s, it was very cognitive and very routine. Now, particularly with our technological advancements and with how globalized we've become, we're 90% of organizations are now operating in this top quadrant that we call cognitive non-routine. And if you're operating in that quadrant, that means to say that your business is solving problems, thinking independently, or people within that organization are thinking independently, and you're having to be creative. And if you're operating there, then you need diverse perspectives most of the time. I don't say all the time, but most of the time. I'd be surprised if you didn't. So yeah, all of these, you know, just it's, early stage of the business, but there's incredible potential, and sometimes it's overwhelming. But, I'm very lucky that I am, I'm of the DNA that I just find, that motivation every day.
So amazing. And honestly, as you go through that, I just love that. First of all, congratulations on setting up the business. It is no mean feat. It is a hard thing to do. Off the edge. I obviously speak from experience, and when you kind of full-time employment, it's always a risk, but at the same time, as you describe your passion and how you got into this space, obviously with, as you say, the Dream Collective, TDC, they were doing amazing work, and you were working with some incredible brands. And I think one can very easily keep going on the hamster wheel of sort of doing the work. Clearly took time, and obviously COVID could have been a catalyst with that, but you took time to reflect and to kind of say, where do I want to go with this? And I think you're very lucky to be able to, and I've spoken about this on the podcast before, but define and identify what your passion is. And it's amazing. You can sort of say, okay, I can harness this. I can harness this passion to do good. And I think want to know, like, I want to do something that lights me up. I want to do something that's that really, really sort of gives me that fire in my belly. And it can be hard to find. People can spend a lifetime trying to actually find that work. So the fact that you've identified it, and you are obviously putting a lot of energy into doing amazing work and working with organizations and individuals and leaders to do great work, it's it's obviously an amazing thing. One of the things that I read, something you said online, was today's consumers aren't just buying products, they're choosing values. And it ties in with, I loved that. It ties in with something that you said just then about 2016. It was sort of, there weren't consultancies around focusing on this. And this obviously has changed a lot. What do you think has changed? I completely agree with you that consumers are choosing values. As a consumer, that is a huge consideration when I'm spending money and choosing where to spend money. How have you seen that change, I guess, over the course of the few years? And where do you see sort of DEI fitting into that piece?
Yes, I think two key things come to mind. So the incoming and younger generations, we have this incredible grassroots movement where they care so much about issues that are outside of themselves that I think, as much flack as they get, I think we have them to be so grateful for putting responsibility onto organizations to develop more socially and economically and ecologically responsible businesses. Even though the ESG movement has been around for a while, it was certainly spurred on by that generational push. And I think that generational push comes to the second point, which is the access to information that we now have thanks to social media. Now that we can see the inequity and injustice and we can't ignore it, this too has added to this increased pressure for organizations to take it more seriously. It's really only the kind of more progressive organizations at the moment that are doing it because not because it's a box ticking exercise, but because they can actually see that it helps to create more sustainable business processes. There are a lot that are still doing DEI as a box ticking exercise, and that's where we get backlash. That's going to hinder us. It has to be authentic, it has to be true, it has to be contextualized as well. So yeah, I think as much flack as the younger generations get, I think we can only have them to be eternally grateful for.
Absolutely.
What about yourself?
They're the change makers, sure.
Yeah. What about yourself? Where do you think, because you work, pretty much on the forefront as well of people who, and changing perceptions and how brands need to appeal to all types of demographics. Do you agree with my observations, or do you see something different? And
totally agree. And I think it's interesting because you're obviously speaking about, and we've been speaking about brands in the sense of consumers and spending money and the brands we choose to buy from. But from an employer's perspective, the employer brand is what every organization has to think about when they want to attract people. Every exec will tell you that staff and people and retention and attraction is one of their biggest, if not their biggest issue in business growth. And so to be able to have an employer brand that can go out to market and attract the best people and have an authentic strategy, no matter, I guess, an authentic brand that retains the best people, it's so important. And I think we've seen a huge shift in that. I think probably, to be honest, I'd say COVID was the catalyst. I think COVID really shone a light on the human aspect of working, and individuals craved and asked for organizations who could provide, I guess, flexibility and health support, and understand that what everyone was going through was a human problem and a human issue rather than just an employee's issue. And so I think since then, what we've seen is a huge demand from employees and from candidates to work for organizations, for leaders, for founders, for businesses that have really strong people values. And similar to what you were speaking about, that has to be authentic. It can't be a tick box exercise of say, yeah, we have flexibility, but you have to be at your desk at this time and you have to kind of, it's all within parameters. Of course, there has to be rules. Anyone can do whatever they want all the time, but it's definitely a massive shift that we've seen. So I do agree with you. I think that we're more in a world where, whether it is a brand itself that people are choosing to buy from, or whether, and absolutely, I can see how Gen Z and the younger generations are the ones who are probably demanding better and asking for more. And that's absolutely a bad thing, because that then leads to change and leads to them needing to make change. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's fascinating because I actually had a coffee with a woman this morning who is very senior in the HR space, and she said, we were talking about obviously within her remit has been diversity, inclusion, this whole piece of work. And she said she's actually been living in the UK for years, and she said that in the UK they're about 4 years ahead of Australia. So legislation and changes in sort of how businesses have to operate, which are probably coming into effect now when we think about the wage and salary transparency that's happening in Australia now. In Europe, that happened about 4 years ago. And so she said where Australia is where they were, in that it was a case of, okay, it is a priority. I know it should be something that I focus on. It is important, but it's just slipping down the list. Whereas as soon as legislation comes in, it has to be a priority because you have to be compliant, and suddenly it gets bumped up the top of the list. And she said now, many years later, it's just absolutely, it's a given. Whereas I think over here, which is incredible. And she said it's almost like being in the future, seeing how different the market is over here.
Wow.
And she said that it's amazing how woven into the leadership team and the day-to-day, and just how accepted diversity and thinking about it and being very intentional around it, how different that is to how it used to be. And we're only at the very beginning of that. So it's exciting. What have you, your sort of, I know you said if you could bucket sort of the conversations you've had, what are the themes that you sort of hear from leaders, whether it is leaders that you're feeling like they're 10 steps behind, or whether it's progressive leaders? What are the themes around what people either want to know or what they want to be doing around diversity and inclusion and belonging and that whole space?
So at the moment, organizations are really, so I focus on, and I talk about DEI. I use the analogy of like, going up a summit, like going up a mountain. And the organizations that I cater to are down at base camp. They're wanting someone to hold their hand. They're a bit nervous. They're not too sure what lay ahead. Organizations that are all the way at the top, at the summit, they're organizations that already have, DEI strategies in place. They're, mastering their employee experience and talent attraction, plus a whole bunch of other DI benefits, and they can kind of see into the future. Eventually, ID8 will get there. Eventually, we will cater to that. And the way I've built the business at the moment is to move organizations from base camp on the ascent and all the way up to summit. So the reason I say all of this is because I guess, you know, if anyone finds it helpful to think of DEI, it is overwhelming. A lot of the time, it's not many organizations know where to start or who to turn to. And, you know, institutions that do provide DEI knowledge is, ironically, they're a bit inaccessible, both in cost, and a lot of the information is gate kept. So when I speak about what I'm hearing, I'm speaking only about people in the kind of at the base camp. You know, I call it like DEI 101.
Yeah, makes sense.
And there's still, I'm still getting a lot of inclusive talent. I say attraction, but you know, I mean inclusive talent ecosystems, because attraction, there are obviously so many touch points, from knowing who your candidate is, presenting a brand online, bringing them through your funnel, and then keeping them engaged in some way. So I call it an ecosystem, and I'm still getting questions. I'm still getting questions like, you know, how can, you know, Lyndal, how can, they work for a recruitment agency, for example, how can my client hire more women? And how can my client develop more inclusive talent strategy? So it's still around talent attraction, which is so interesting for me, because on one hand, you're hearing about these mass layoffs, and then the other, the demand still is in inclusive talent attraction. But I think if we actually broaden that a little bit, I think, or excuse me, not broaden, but if we bring that up a little bit, I actually think that's about, I'd really love to see people talking about inequity a lot more. So how can we create more equitable talent ecosystems? Because I think the word equitable is also the moment where people go, that's a bit of a penny drop moment. When you realize that one system, one hiring process, or one system of hiring doesn't actually cater to, it actually excludes a lot of people. I'm also seeing a lot of, so I work with small businesses as well, small to medium businesses. I'm seeing a lot of, I guess, you know, again, a penny drop moment when small to medium business owners ask, how can I bring innovation, or how can I reinvigorate my sales and marketing processes? How can I reach new audiences? How can I, you know, create products and services that, you know, clients or, you know, customers love? And then when I talk about the inclusive market analysis, for example, so doing a more inclusive TAM analysis, we often find that they have missed complete demographics who would actually benefit and really love their services, but they aren't seeing that this business exists at all. So yeah, it's across the spectrum of finding new customers, closing new customers, finding talent. Yeah, they're probably the key themes I'd say at the moment, and I don't think that will change. That has been the case for years now, which is really interesting, isn't it? I think we'll get to a time, and I really look forward to the time, that we too can be where the UK is. That sounds wonderful. And it's just, you don't even think about it. Yeah.
It sounds like you're on the forefront of it as well. As you're sort of going through the next few years, you're going to be in amongst it. You're going to be there supporting businesses. And I think exactly what you described is sort of, I guess, a mirror or an echo of what the conversations we have with organizations as well. It's a want and a desire to do better, but probably and knowing that kind of it should be priority, because it can, as you say, it impacts all aspects of business. Like everything you just touched on is essentially running a successful business: the sales, the marketing, the talent attraction, the pipeline, the consumers, the customers as an endpoint. There's so many different facets that this can have a positive impact on. So it's it makes sense that that's sort of what organizations are thinking about, and it's great to see that and I think you speak about this a lot as well, but it is a commercial decision. It's a commercial choice. And it's, funnily enough, that is when I speak to businesses, and we speak to businesses a lot about having a strong people strategy and having a strong focus on culture. It is, at the end of the day, a commercial decision, because what you are doing is you are retaining people, you have highly engaged people, which results in more productive people, and which results in a more successful business. And so still see old school organizations who don't invest in their people and don't invest, whether that's from a learning and development perspective, whether that's from a culture perspective. And what that results in is more of a pain in the neck for you. So it's twofold. I think it's the right thing to do, but it also is good for business as well.
And do you think it's because the ROI is harder to quantify in strategy, in when we talk about like people strategies and, investing in learning development, for example, do you think it's because they can't see immediate ROI?
I think so. I think so. I think it also, a lot of it comes down to trust and what people value. Like, I think people who are progressive and who are strong leaders and exec teams that have, tying in with everything we're speaking about, who have diversity and who have a lot of different lenses, they'll understand the importance and the value of people. Where I think when you come at it from a more black and white or potentially purely commercial lens, what's in black and white, what's in an Excel spreadsheet, what's in a P&L, it could look like costs. And so, yeah, it exactly is that. It's like, what is the return on investment? Perhaps it isn't as easy to quantify. If you invest X amount in a marketing campaign and you get X amount of leads, it's sort of easy to say where that money went and produced. So yes, I think that is a link. And I think it depends very much on the individual and where they're at their own sort of leadership journey as well. You mentioned before, I guess, touching on the work that you're doing, I can easily see how there would be a sense of injustice and a sense of frustration. And in anything where you're an advocate and you're fighting for change, you also inevitably will be in front and center for the disappointment and for the frustrations and everything that comes with that. Where do you, in thinking about the positive side of it, where do you get the optimism from? So what gives you hope? What kind of conversations, what kind of encounters? I know you mentioned earlier about having the penny drop with some people, but yeah, what are the things that sort of keep you going when you are in work that inevitably feel like it's you're pushing something uphill?
Oh my God, that's exactly it. Actually, that's a really good question, because I've been thinking about this a lot. One, it's tracking my wins. Like, I've got a list of wins that I refer to whenever I'm having a low day.
Love that so much.
It is also, I get really depleted being on social media. So both LinkedIn and Instagram are my two social media channels, which is terrible, because it's also where I learn a lot. It is where a lot of the conversation about inequity is happening. And as someone that doesn't identify with any underrepresented minority, it's really important for me to stay engaged with these communities, not just on social media, but offline as well. So I'm having to, and honestly, I haven't found a good habit around it yet. The 3 months that I deleted social media over the Christmas period, I think it was like November onwards, was like probably the most mentally sound, because while I'm learning a lot, it's also pulling me, it's dragging me emotionally, spiritually, and you do feel like nothing you can do in this lifetime will even make a dent. I also refer back to keep me on track, and I do refer back often to my theory of change that I developed in the early stages of the business. So when I feel you kind of, that theory of change, for anyone that isn't familiar with that model, it's kind of like a logic model where you have your goal at the end, and then you're working backwards across a number of pillars all the way back to what actions are you taking today. So I look at that often because sometimes it feels like the gap between what I'm doing today and the overall goal, just to clarify, is to reduce prejudiced attitudes that hold marginalized communities back, and also promote the social and economic equality of these same demographics. So I often refer back to that logic model, having a visual to go, oh, yes, okay, it might feel really removed from my goal, the action I'm doing today, but that does sustain me. And the reason I said, you know, I've been thinking about this often is, as a business owner, it like, and this is the first time I've owned a business. I've always worked in small businesses, so I've had visibility into just how crazy and complex and overwhelming it can be.
I can fill in the blanks there. Yeah. Mental.
Yeah. But it's equal parts overwhelming and liberating when you actually think about, oh my God, like these wins that I just won, like that was all me. I had the power to just win all the time. Obviously, that's not considering all the variables in the way, but you know, and obviously it's a numbers game, but it had me. Being a business owner is obviously incredible personal growth experience, but you just realize that it's all up to you, no one else. And I think that's really liberating. That's probably one of my favorite lessons. And I'm saying all of this because obviously it comes back to the wins. I always make sure that I'm setting myself up to at least have one win a week, and that means doing a lot of things to get there.
I love that so much. And I think it's a really good point, because it's the forest and the trees, right? It's you, and you're working towards this big audacious goal. You know your purpose, your mission, your intention and what you're trying to do, but you also have to, it's so important to feel like you're moving the needle. Otherwise you might not necessarily have that sense of meaning, because it feels like you're doing, and I feel it often. I feel like, oh, I don't know, I felt like I did administration today. I felt like I just got back to some emails and calls. And actually, funnily enough, at the beginning of January, I started, I constantly feel like I'm never doing enough, which I don't know if that's a
wow
achiever thing, or I don't know what it is, but there's something there anyway, some pattern. And so literally I started writing, okay, this is like, here are some of the big things that I did. And when I look back on the week, I'm like, okay, I moved the needle in a massive way. I impacted this person. I impacted this person's career. I impacted, and you kind of see the work you've done. And it does, although you feel like you're kind of just going through the motions sometimes and ticking things off, as our days are filled with meetings and our diaries are filled with everything. I think it's really important to do that. And I think you can so easily just be focused on what's in front of you without actually holding that, okay, what am I actually moving forward? And I love that you take the moment to be like, it is liberating and I do have the power. It is a privilege and a gift to be able to choose where we spend our time and what we spend it on. And I think I can fall into the trap of spending it on the granular, like I can get into, okay, I need to fix the quality of this, or I need to work on this. Whereas yeah, I think it's just reminding ourselves to and as a business owner, you have to do both. As a business owner, inevitably you'll want to be in the ideas land, in creation mode. That's the happiest place when I'm in creation mode. At the same time, like, things of course need to be done in the back end. You wear many hats. You kind of switch from left to right brain a lot over the course of a day, and surrounding yourself by people who are very good at the things that you are not as good at is also important, speaking from experience.
Yes, and I have to say, Sinead, ever since we met all those years ago, you really are the embodiment of leadership. You have such a way of bringing people in a way that makes them feel safe and seen. And I'm so glad that you're working in this people space, because you will have no doubt had a direct and indirect impact on hundreds, if not thousands, of lives and their career trajectory, but also helping organizations be better leaders. And yes, I've always admired you and your business for that. And it's a great example of how successful businesses can be heart-centered, human-centered. And you know, if they are at the core of your being, you know, I really don't want to overstate this, but you safeguard yourself from a lot if you have people at the heart of what you're doing. So yeah, I just have to say that.
Thank you so much for that call. I know, look, that means a lot coming from you, absolutely. And I think you're right. And the word you use there, I think you're right. I think you're right, not in terms of me, the phrase you've just given me, but in terms of the term and the message around heart-centered businesses that resonates so much. And I think that is it, right? And even with with Lotus, we buy merchandise and we buy gifts for clients and we do that sort of thing. And I always choose to buy from social enterprises and buy from businesses that have some sort of impact in what they're doing. And I think it is our choices. By no means are we perfect. And of course, everyone has learnings and lessons and growth and all the rest of it that we have to work through. But I think working with that heart and working in a way, the word that really stood out to me on your website, which is a word that I keep coming back to, is intentional. And I think it's being intentional. It's being intentional in how we are as individuals, in how we show up in business, in how we approach our careers. And it's not easy. I think we're also, in touching what you said about social media, we're so easily pulled into this sort of just automatic sort of just scrolling, and like life is set up for us to be slightly disconnected. And if we can be intentional about what our goal is or what our purpose is or who we want to surround ourselves by, I think that can hold a lot of weight and a lot of good can be done with it. And honestly, with this whole, even in speaking to you in the sort of half an hour or so that we've been on this, I actually had a meeting a couple of days ago we have a DEI committee here at Lotus, and they were doing some work and we had some action items and they were sort of feeding back what the team thought, and we did a survey. And so we're kind of thinking about how we can be better. And of course, as a recruitment agency, we have a huge impact. We not only can influence the choices and the decisions that we make, but we also can influence the clients and the organizations, small, medium, large, international, that we work with as well. So there really is a huge ability for us to have a lot of sway. But at the same time, as we were having this conversation, and it is front of mind, it's still one of those things where we say, where do we begin? Where do we start? Like which area do we focus on first? And I think I'd love to know from you, whether it's for small businesses, whether it's for an individual themselves who's resonating with what you're saying, like where should people begin? Like what, obviously they can contact you and you're doing amazing work and being that sort of resource for people who are serious about change. But if there are so many different ties, so many different areas to explore, where would you suggest that people get started?
Oh gosh. So yeah, it's a great question. I'd say we'd have to do some self-reflection first and understand the whole field of like unconscious bias, particularly when it falls under DEI. It gets a little bit of a bad rap because unconscious bias training is wheeled out as like a fix all solution to DEI. But it is truly, you truly do need to understand what biases do I have? What is the role that I play in my organization? How does this, and from by that, I mean, what level of power do I have? And how does that influence those who I extend opportunities versus not? And, when our biases and I guess, role of power intersect, and if we don't know that they do, that's an incredibly dangerous place to be. And that's where a lot of leaders are often sitting. So some self-reflection, then get into the data. So if you are in a position within the organization to have a look at the data from a demographic perspective, obviously we don't either have it or we aren't able to access it. People aren't required to give their demographic data. But if we do have access to some data, get curious and go beyond the superficial level of men, women, because, even that is problematic right now. Well, not right now, but, there are a variety of genders that we need to be thinking about. Exactly. But thinking about almost doing a process of elimination. So who don't we want in the business? And quite often that's actually not, that's not that many people. And so when you think about, okay, well, and when I say in the business, I mean either candidates or customers. Okay, well, look how varied this demographic set is. Why don't we have people from this demographic buying our products and services or within our organization? And what about this one? We can then look to, I guess, and we don't want to make assumptions based on how people look. We need to get really curious in conversation as well within the team. There's you don't need data to have a view on what needs to happen. Anecdotally, you can get a sense for where things aren't quite right. So yeah, I guess I'd say, start with self-reflection, understand where your biases may be impacting the opportunities of others, and how it might be impacting your decision making. And then when it comes to systems and within the organization, how are your systems holding people back or out, and what in your role can you be doing to shift that?
Yeah, I love that. It's and I think you're exactly right, that really is interesting, because everyone, I think, has some level of power in it. Doesn't need to be someone who is the business owner. In your peer group or in your networks, we all sort of have some power in how we show up and where we show up. And I think crossing that over, as you say, and intersecting that with our biases and our unconscious biases, becoming and reflecting, as you say, and becoming more aware of those is only going to benefit people, and is only going to create more space for change and improvement and inclusivity. But yeah, it's a big piece of work. It definitely feels, as a small business owner, it feels so important, but also overwhelming. And I was actually on a panel at a recruitment agency event at the end of last year, and it was a lot of conversation around sort of DEI and strategies around this and the impact that recruitment agencies can have. And the vast majority of people in the room just said, I don't even know where to start. So I think you're right. I think intention and awareness and wanting to start is a good place to start. Obviously, there are a lot of resources out there, yourself included, that obviously help sort of figure out what an actual starting point or next move, I suppose, is from there.
Yeah. And and I offer to anyone that is listening, please reach out. No obligation, no cost chat. I truly am so passionate about making DEI more accessible. And my goal really is to help more businesses get on the ladder of DEI at that 101 stage. So truly, I welcome anyone to reach out for no obligation, zero cost chat, and we can create something that's a little bit more bespoke for their organization.
Amazing. And it's definitely something we have a lot of conversations around this. And as we're speaking, I'm thinking, how can we partner? How can we? There's obviously so much crossover in terms of the people that we would deal with and interact with. So my creative brain is already going, okay, where's there opportunities? Because it's such an important message. And one thing as well that you write about is collective intelligence. And
oh gosh, yeah,
I love the idea of that so much. Is that, as it says in the tin, sort of the idea of the more of us coming together, the more diversity and what we're doing, the more power we have to sort of, I guess, make change or to do.
Oh my goodness, the whole field of collective intelligence, I'm just totally obsessed. Our world is so complex and so it's not as siloed as what it used to be when we were choosing, roles such as, law or medicine or communications or something. Things are very overlapped now. And, if we don't have the ability to be curious about different perspectives and different disciplines and different ways of, approaching problems, we truly cannot create teams and businesses that will last. I always encourage curiosity. And I'd say that would probably be the recommendation for anyone that doesn't know where to start on the DEI journey as well. Just be curious, understand that inequity exists, and be curious about why that may be in your organization.
Absolutely, I love that, and I think it's a continuation from collaboration. There's so much that was felt very strongly that my style of leadership is graphic in how it is. I want to democratic, sorry, I was like demographic, I know that's not the right democratic, in that it's there's always benefit. Of course, you can't just have kind of agreement by consensus. You have to, of course, times for different things, but the idea of empowering more people and bringing more people up alongside you is far more impactful than dictatorship, as an example. But look, obviously this podcast, When Work Isn't Work, it is literally created, it was created for people to hear from passionate people who love what they do, and everything we're talking about, hearing the work that you're doing and how you're doing it, and the fact that you did jump off and decide to start on your own, which is a very brave move in itself. I know it will resonate so much with everyone. So thank you so much for joining. I will share your LinkedIn profile, the website link, and everything else for people in the notes, so that they can find you. But thank you so much for being such an amazing guest today. I've honestly loved this conversation.
Likewise, as always, Sinead. Always good to see you.
This podcast is sponsored by Lotus People Recruitment. We are an award-winning Sydney-based recruitment agency with a genuine human-first and innovative approach. Lotus People are disrupting the recruitment industry by placing quality and service at the heart of all we do. Recruiting roles across HR, talent, business support, and much more. Head to our website today for more information if you are a job seeker or an employer hiring staff. We're at lotuspeople.com.au.